The House of the Scorpion is an amazing book. If you don't know The House of the Scorpion, then you should probably read it. It's a very famous Newbery Honor Award-winning book. And so, recently I actually read this book because somebody recommended it to me, and it was incredibly fun. It's set in this dystopian world, and I think it's interesting for a lot of reasons, but it covers so many different themes concerning like humanity, politics, and like in general just morality and philosophy, that it's like it's fascinating that such like a book that is normally targeted for children can cover that much. And I will say this isn't even a book targeted for children, but a book targeted at like the general audience that really probes a lot of important questions. And so that's what I want to talk about today. So first, there's this entire thing about clones, right? Matt, the main character in the story, is a clone. And I think this is really, really important because he is a clone of El Patron, who is this really old dude that's like also like very powerful. And El Patron basically controls like basically like the government, and he's like a very influential figure and a very dangerous person. And so there's just basically this entire like country, Collopium, right? And so basically like this entire country, they like create like all the opium and all that, right? And they make the drugs, and then they like I don't know, ship it across like the border, or like it's basically a very profitable industry. And so what happens is that basically El Patron is like the head honcho. He's like the guy who is the he's a leader, or he's at least very powerful, right? Very influential. And so what happens is that Matt is just one of many clones of El Patron. And so he grows up like knowing that he's a clone. I mean, he doesn't grow up, but like after like he's like 6 or so, then he knows that he's a clone. And so he thinks that he's the only clone, and he also really enjoys the fact that, you know, he gets a good education, he gets a good life. But at the end of the day, El Patron tries to kill him because all of these people were just creating the clones for like body parts, right? For example, you get that clone and you harvest his organs because those organs are exactly the same as your previous organs, so you know they're amazing. And so I think that this like spurs so many questions. Like this is one concept, and this isn't even like most of the book, right? So first, it's this entire thing about if you're a clone, then who are you, right? And I think that another really amazing book series that delves into this is Masterminds by Gordon Corman. It's like a it's a trilogy. So basically, the book's plot is that there are these kids, and these kids are actually the clones of like criminal masterminds, like really, really bad people, like thieves, terrorists. And so basically, it's this experiment about nature versus nurture. And so basically these kids grow up in amazing environments, but it's basically testing, well, you guys are the clones of like horrible people. Like these people are horrible. I don't know. Like they've killed people. They're like murderers. They're thieves. They've done like horrible things to innocent people. And so basically the concept was like, do you turn out to be bad people? Do you turn out to be good people? And I think this is a very important concept that people have been trying to solve for generations. And I think that this book also goes into this. And I think that what this book is trying to say is that you are not the person that you're cloned after. Especially because of the fact that Matt is much kinder, much better than El Patron, right? Sure, he has some of these same characteristics or not. I mean, obviously he has some of the same characteristics, but he also has kind of the feeling of, he can also like imitate El Patron to like a very like impressive extent, to the point that like it's not only imitation, but it's probably like it comes more naturally to him because he still is a clone of El Patron. And so there's basically just this like question two questions actually. First, how similar are clones to their to the thing that they're cloned after? And second of all, where do you draw the line between, obviously, like, these people are like the same genetically, but in other ways they're not. It's basically like, where do you draw that line? Where do you draw that line of they're now different, right? And so that's like another big thing. There's also this entire thing about like, is it ethical to like harvest yourself for human organs? Because at the end of the day, like, I mean, sure, I can clone myself and I can like harvest myself for human organs, and like, I would say that that's ethical because it's myself. I mean, like, if I'm doing it to another person, maybe that's unethical. But there's also this question of, well, I'm doing it to myself, right? I am making another like me, and I'm saying, hey, what about we team up together and I take your stuff, because at the end of the day, we're both the same person. We both have the same objective, right? We have the same DNA, we have the same DNA, right? We're made out of the same cells, and I think that this is just like a very intriguing topic because we haven't really cloned anybody yet, right? And so we just don't know, like, I mean, we have cloned animals, but not even animals. We haven't cloned to like an enormous extent. And we've never cloned a human before, like, at least as people know of. And so basically that means that there's a lot of unanswered ethical questions that remained to be like seen to, right? There's also like this question of like, are clones people? And so in this society, clones are treated as like subhuman. They're treated as like animals because the point is that like, mostly clones are like injected with some type of like some like drug or something that immediately makes them like really stupid or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but like the book describes it as like destroying all of their mental faculties and like just reducing them to like animals that are like dogs or like, I don't know. It's just like it knocks out the mental faculties, and a lot of like the characters in the book think of like these clones as like really like stupid, like bad animals. And so I think there's like this other question of like, are clones bad? And I think that there's so many levels to this. Like, cloning itself is like such a controversial topic, and honestly there's so many books out there that I'm actually planning on making a video about that as well. But like, I think that's like one of the main parts of the House of the Scorpion. But there's also some other parts. Another part that there is are these Egypts, right? These Egypts, or these workers, basically have computer chips in their brains that make them like work. Like, for example, they can't like stop working. They have to have somebody tell them to stop working, right? If they can these keep working even if they're like dying of thirst. Like, and also like smart horses, right? And sorry, safe horses. These safe horses, they just like, for example, they just keep drinking until like you tell them to stop drinking. They don't drink until you tell them to start drinking. They can't get out of the farm like property, right? And so there's a lot of these things that are just crazy, and they also like, again, tell us about lots of ethical implications, right? Like, obviously this is unethical, but like, first of all, like, if things like this happen, like how are like there I think there's like, I'm not exactly sure if there's a lot of ethical questions here. I think a lot, like, they're just bad, right? I mean, obviously they're just bad, but like, it's also a very interesting concept, and also like pokes at the thought of like, lots of people like, there's some people out there who strive to like take control of everything, and will this be the next step in humanity's journey of seeking better control? I mean, I guess not humanity's journey, but like, I think that if we look at history, there's like always like a lot of like bad people who are trying to control people. Like back in the day, they were like peasants. Then there were like lots of laborers, and then there was like I don't know, like sharecropping, and then I think there's like so many different examples of this happening that there's the book I think poses the question: is this just the next like step in this long and horrible journey? And I think that's like another interesting question. Another like really interesting question I think also comes out of this is like, what is like better? Is like, or is there like any like perfect system? And the reason that I say this is because even when Matt escapes out of this like really horrible authoritarian area and he goes into this other country, the other country isn't that nice as well, right? Like, it's pretty corrupt. Matt is forced into like a plankton factory, and like he's forced to work, and it's mostly because they're orphans, and orphans are forced to work for the better good of society. And while that society is much more focused on making sure that the world is like a better place for everybody, it's still like a very like shoddily disguised way of just forcing like child labor, right? And so this begs the question. I like society is obviously awesome, right? We want to be promoting society, but at what cost do we want to be promoting society, right? Most people will say that making orphans work for the benefit of society is not very good, right? That's not a benefit to society in the fact because these orphans are being like negatively impacted. By the way, these aren't like necessarily orphans, but like they've been separated from their family. They don't know where their family is, and most likely their family is either dead or like captured by the farm patrol and forced to work. At which point they're like, since like they can't like get back to their family, nor can they like. Or nor can the family necessarily, like, probably not come back. Like, most people will just consider them as orphans, like, in like, in practice, right? And so, basically, this really, like, again, this, like, really tries to ask us the question, because, like, in the land of, like, opium, what we saw is that it was just horrible, right? It was just, like, controlled by these authoritarian leaders. In the other land, and sorry, I'm just like not remembering any of the names here, which is like why, even though I read it like, I don't know, like a week and a half ago, so, yeah. I apologize that I can't remember the names, but, the land that Matt escapes to, and which is like featured in the latter part of the story, this place is like also not that great, and I think that this really just asks like, what is the right balance? Are both places just unnecessarily authoritarian? Is that the answer, or is it like something deeper? And I think that like that's another fascinating question. And I think that both systems are too authoritarian, and that both systems, even though the second is trying to disguise it as a benefit to society, is still under these same influences, the same corruption, and the same and is like driven by the same like systems as opium. So that's what I'm going to say. Now, also there's like even more. Can you love somebody that's horrible, right? And so I think this is very like important, because Matt has conflicting emotions about El Patron, right? Because El Patron is like kind to him, but he also just but El Patron is also very evil. And on top of that, like, El Patron literally tried to just harvest, like, Matt's organs. And so I think this is very interesting, because, like, obviously, Matt is kind of like El Patron, so, like, I think it's very hard to hate yourself, but at the same time, and, like, El Patron is nice, but at the same time, El Patron is also kind of evil, and he also, like, obviously lacks, like, ethics. Maybe you should try, like, taking an ethics class, right? And so I think this just, like, really begs the question, can you do both at the same time? Especially because human emotions are immensely complex, and a lot of times they don't make any sense at all. This book also like goes really deep into that, and the reason I'm not like providing any answers, I'm mostly talking about like what the book explores, is because there's obviously not any answers, and like this is a very open-ended question, and and one that requires more independent thought. But I do think that like this book is saying like you can do both, and while they do collide, they're also like, and they seem to be very like opposite to each other, they're also very possible. And in a lot of situations, those are actually kind of the emotions that we see, because if we think about it, there's nothing like that we like only love and like we don't hate, and we just like everything about it, or just hate everything about it, right? There's obviously pros and cons to everything that we do in this world, right? For example, you might like that restaurant because it has good like hamburgers or whatever, but you also know that those hamburgers are high in calories, calories, and that it's also, and maybe that restaurant is also like kind of far away from your home, and maybe it's like kind of expensive, and maybe it takes a long time for the food to come up, but obviously the hamburgers are amazing, so you still like the restaurant because, I mean, who doesn't say no to a good hamburger? But the restaurant isn't like serving like good like options, right? So for people who don't want to eat beef, or people who are vegan, well, the restaurant is like, you're out of luck. Just like, I don't know, drink like water or something, right? Or they drink like beverages or something like that, right? And so like those are like all pros and cons, right? But I think that there's and so you might not like the restaurant that much, but you also kind of like it. And so I think that there are like situations and that happens, and this like just like represents one. I think that it's also a very extreme example, and I think that's like that was done on purpose, not only because like so as to like demonstrate that it's very possible in a very extreme way. The last thing that I want to talk about is basically this idea of like, can you love like this idea of like morality. Again, it's morality. First of all, there's this entire like idea of morality in the entirety of the book, right? Are clothes considered human? Like obviously there's like so many pieces of morality. I think we've already covered that, but there's this last idea of morality. That's basically that the mother of Maria, Maria's mom, she literally just left her daughters and just like went to the other like country, and then she's like, she won the Nobel Prize, and like she's done like a lot of amazing things, like like help like rights and stuff like that, right? Human rights, especially in for like people who are living in opium, but or I guess in similar situations. I'm not exactly sure how far her work extends, but basically that's what happens. But then you have to consider that she literally just left her children. And Matt also realizes that this near the end of the book, he kind of realizes that this person, like, sure, she might care a lot about them, but like at the end of the day, she's still willing to leave her daughters, which tells us that she doesn't really care about them, or doesn't care about them as much as she cares about like other people's rights. And I think this is a very important thing. Like, first of all, most people will be like indignant. How can you like other people's rights more than your own daughters? Right? Like, I mean, they're your children. Like, even like most people would say that like parents have this inherent obligation to their children to favor and support their children above all else, because that's their duty, that's their moral obligation to their children, right? And so I think that's very important. But at the same time, there's also this idea that, well, I mean, this mom obviously just knew that her children will be in safe hands with like their father, because the father is he's obviously like kind of immoral, but like not for those reasons, right? Like not for like harming children or anything. And she says like, well, I'm not, I just want to support community rights. It's like, isn't that a win-win? And I think that there's just a lot of different conflicting ideas. On one hand, she was trying to solve for like enormous problems that stretched across, that affect thousands of people, and maybe that has like a higher moral weight. And also, if you think about it, it also her children were directly harmed because of this decision. And so I think that exploring the morality of that is another important thing, right? I would say that maybe she is in some ways justified, but that doesn't mean that what she did was entirely right or fair for her children. But it's justified to the point that it would be acceptable to do so, but there's obviously some really big negative side effects and consequences that she would have to deal with in the future. Now, I think that The House of the Scorpion was just really good because it covers a lot of things that you wouldn't really expect a regular book to cover. There are a lot of award-winning books where you understand exactly what the author is trying to get at, and it's very well written. And obviously there's a reason that it won say the Newbery Award. And I think that examining those books are important. But at the end of the day, I think there's some books that are just outstanding in lots of different ways. I think this is a very good example of them. I don't know why it only won the Newbery Honor. I think it should have won the Newbery Medal. And I also think it just really, pushes the thought that just because it like the Newbery Medal is mostly like targeted for like middle grade readers, I would say. But like I would say that, you know, like I myself am like kind of transitioning into the world of like, you know, out of the world of middle grade into like, you know, more like classics and things like that. But even so, this book really caught my attention, and I literally just read it in like, I think like 2 days or 3 days, because it was really interesting. And so I think this really tells people, just because a book is aimed at children doesn't necessarily mean that it should be read only by children. And a lot of the time, there's lots of amazing books that are like maybe slightly less complicated and maybe slightly less like a lower reading level or a comprehension level, but actually cover many deep themes that you would not be able to find in the average like book that is like targeted at adults, for example. I think that that's like another like big thing that I wanted to address, and that also like leads me to my final point. There's a second book in the series, which is why I'm planning on reading that and doing another analysis of that. I'll also be actually interested in the book because I understand there's a lot of people who haven't read this book, and I'll also be talking about some of the newer Newbery Award winners, because I know I haven't been keeping track with the Newbery Award winners a lot, so that's something that I'm also planning on doing. I think that 2026, that the American Library Association just released this list, so that's another thing that I'll be looking at. That's pretty much it. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye!